News Talk 1400 KFRU is proud to present the KFRU-Heritage-Series. It's a 1-hour perspective on the events and the people whose lives have contributed to the heritage of Boone County. Listen each Sunday at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. The KFRU-Heritage-Series. From News Talk 1400 KFRU.
We take suggestions that we've said over the year that we've done our Heritage program for guests, and several people have suggested we talk to Key Groshong. And so, Key Groshong, by request, you are our guest. How does that make you feel?
Well, that makes me feel very good, David. I'm honored to be here.
Well, it's a pleasure to talk to you. And as I always tell our guests, we don't know where we're going to go, and we're not sure where we're going to end up. But I'm looking forward to talking to you because you're one of the persons that, as long as I've lived here, I always hear your name. Well, you've been involved in all kinds of things. What spurs you to be so community involved?
Well, my wife says it's because I am not able to use the word no. That's her first answer. I'm interested in a lot of things that happen here. I got involved, began to get involved when I worked at the university, and I feel that it's important that if you live in a community like this one, that you do a little payback work. Mm-hmm. And I just find it interesting and rewarding. And frankly, I did some when I worked, and I've done quite a bit more since I retired.
We may talk about the specifics of that in just a moment. Let's find out a bit more about you. Where are you from originally?
I grew up in Lincoln County, Missouri, Troy, which is just about 55 miles west and north of St. Louis, and it was a little rural county seat farming community when I grew up. The population had been around 1,900 since the turn of the century until about 1960, and then of course General Motors built a new plant at Wentzville, Missouri, and the dual lane the highway north to Troy, and that all changed. But when I was there, it was a sleepy little town, and I enjoyed it immensely.
When did you come to Columbia then? For school or
yes,
for job?
Came here in the fall of 1958 to go to school, to go to the University of Missouri. I was an 18-year-old freshman at that time.
Now, what did you intend to study?
Well, I thought about a lot of things like most students do. I thought once about law, and then I determined I probably wasn't interested in that. And like many students do, I took some different courses, and one of the courses I happened to stumble into was in the business school. It was an accounting course, and it was Introduction to Accounting, and I just had a natural knack for that, and found out that a lot of people find that quite boring and not very interesting, and in fact, it's not easy for many, but it was for me, and so I ended up majoring in accounting, and I've always said it's what got me through school, and everybody looks at me like, that can't be, most people flunk out over that. I said, well, that's what made me get through school. I took every accounting course, the undergraduate course they offered, except one. And the one course I didn't take was governmental accounting. Of course, is where I spent virtually all of my career.
Did you, as part of the accounting curriculum, statistics?
Well, yes, I had statistics, of course, mathematics courses and all. But I did not. I have to say, I did not enjoy and didn't necessarily do well in the advanced math courses. But the accounting part, the theory and the operation of that and how that all played together, I guess it just was fascinating to me. And maybe I had some engineering bent. I don't know. But I always liked it. When you got done with accounting, unlike some fields you're in, you never know quite when you're finished. Well, in accounting, they used to say, on the lower right-hand corner, if it foots across the bottom and adds down and the number agrees, you're done. So I like that.
You survived well without having governmental accounting.
You
just learned on the job, didn't you?
I did OJT, the governmental accounting part.
So now from that, did you go immediately into working at the university?
No, I was here in school, and it's hard to believe today, but back in late 1950s and early 1960s, there really wasn't much going on in the world in terms of military engagements. I guess there weren't wars, but military engagements. I missed the Korean War, and Vietnam hadn't cranked up really good then. But so the worst thing a young man at my age, you think a year or 2 years is forever, and so the worst thing you think of was getting drafted and being sent to Fort Polk, Louisiana, or someplace like that for 2 years. Or at the time, getting sent overseas, which now I think that was the dumbest thing I didn't do as a young man. But at any rate, at the time. So I had an opportunity to join the reserve unit, an Army Reserve unit here. And so I did that. I took time out then. I dropped out of school and did my 6-month engagement, and then I got in the reserve. So then I came back and finished up my degree, and my first job was in Sedalia, Missouri. I worked for a shoe manufacturer. At that time, there were several small to mid-sized shoe manufacturers in Missouri. Actually, one of the largest shoe company, I guess, in the world was in St. Louis headquartered. There may still be. But
is that Brown Shoe Company?
Yeah, Brown and American, I think, was down there. But anyway, this was Town and Country. It was a little medium price fashion, women's medium fashion or fashion shoes. And so I worked there about not quite a year and a half. I went over there and I worked from January until, I guess, April of the next year. And we had an opportunity. I was looking to move. I could see the shoe industry probably wasn't going to go too far. And so we decided we would try to go to St. Louis or Kansas City. And I had interviewed actually in St. Louis with a CPA firm down there. And I came to back to Columbia. I guess was must have been in January, because a friend of mine was graduating that I had known in college, and he'd just gotten married, and we went out to visit him out to Lake of the Woods. He was living in a little house out there where that funeral home is now, as a matter of fact. But he had taken a job with the university and was going to Rolla. And we were talking. I said, well, I'm getting ready to leave or thinking about finding another spot. And he said, well, I know the university's looking for somebody in the accounting department. I said, well, send me an application. He did. I filled it out. And, of course, they say the rest history. I interviewed. They hired me, and I came in April of 1965.
And stayed until?
Well, stayed until the end of August 2002. About 37 years and, 4 months or whatever. I didn't expect to, like most people. I expected I'd be here 5 years. I thought, 5 years is a good time, and then I'll look for another position. Well, at the end of the first 5 years, I got a job promotion, and that was pretty nice. So I thought, well, I'll stay a while longer. So I stayed another 5, and at the end of the second 5, I got another move. And then that one lasted a little bit longer. I was in that one probably 7 years or something. And then there was a reorganization, and I became the first director of business services during Dr. Euling's time. And, well, that went pretty good. And by that time, my children were in school, and my wife had a business, and we had begun to really set down roots here. And so we decided then that we would stay, and whatever happened, we would stay, and it was a nice job, and we'd get along fine. Well, then that progressed, and then I had an opportunity to be vice chancellor. So I was interim a couple of times in that process, and I then ended up retiring in that position. So I had a really much longer run here than I expected. And I was lucky. It was progressive. I was able to move along and do several different things.
Key Groshong is our guest. Let me go back to college time. I think I've asked almost every guest that I've had who's lived here for quite a while and was here during college. I can remember when I was in college here, I didn't really know what was going on in the community very well. Did you feel like you were a campus college student, or were you aware of what was going on in Columbia at that time? I guess the point of my question is, I'm curious as to your memories as to what it was like living in Columbia late 50s, early 60s as a college student.
Well, I, of course, lived the first year in residence hall and then lived in rooming. Basically, there were rooming houses here. It's rooming houses here then, and that's what I lived in. The environment was, in my opinion, I'll be interested what other people of my era have told you, but in my opinion, it was a much different environment and a whole different situation living in Columbia and going to the university, and living on campus then than it is today. There's a lot of things. One, the community was a lot smaller. Two, the campus was a lot smaller. And in fact, when I came here in the fall of 1958, the enrollment at the University of Missouri was less than it had been at its peak right at the end of World War II. So the enrollment had gone up and come back down. Now, it wouldn't be very long till it got back up. The campus was much different than it is today because it was a campus of academic buildings interspersed among basically rooming houses and some businesses. The whole street across from Jesse Hall on the south side of the street across from Jesse, that whole street was full of businesses, little businesses that catered to the students who lived on campus, basically. And it's interesting to digress a minute, it's interesting to see what's happening today with the downtown apartments or student housing that's being built, because what it's going to do is bring back to the downtown community and the university much of what was here in the well, prior to probably the 1960s when I came back. That was all beginning to disappear. So you lived really, you didn't live in the community. So I would have to tell you, I didn't know much about the community because you lived on the campus, and our services were there, and people were there at night. So not only did you come in the morning and go to class and study in the evening, but you were there to social. I mean, so you would, after you finished studying, maybe you'd go to the Italian Village or one of the other places there and socialize in the evening. So you were concentrated there. You didn't get out like it.
Did most students have cars at that point in time?
Well, when I first came, the first, I think, freshman, sophomore were supposedly, quote, forbidden from having cars. Now, that isn't saying they didn't have. That's correct. That isn't saying
that trick.
They didn't. But so not as many. And the other thing was, people didn't. It's hard to believe because they talk about how the debt and how students don't have any money. But students today probably really have more than they had then in terms of things, okay? And students didn't necessarily have a car then. They would come in here, parents would bring them and they'd stay or they'd come. I generally pretty much had a car, so.
So the social activities would have been centered right around the school.
Mostly
and there were businesses there
around.
that were able to do that also.
Yeah, there were eating establishments, drinking establishments. There was a clothing store, drugstore, a little grocery type thing, pool hall there at one time. So clothing store, jewelry store, of course. That was the last business to go, was the jewelry store.
Accounting classes were held mostly where? I'm thinking accounting now in GCB, which is no longer called that. I think it's Strickland Hall.
Most of my accounting classes were taken in Middlebush Hall, but the first accounting class that I had was taken in what is now the museum, which is Pickard Hall, and I believe that's where it was either there or the one immediately south. But they were finishing building Middlebush Hall, so Middlebush Hall was not completed until like my sophomore year.
Did you have contact with some of the athletes, or was the campus small enough then that people who you just ran into all kinds of people, the campus leaders and athletes, or were they placed on the same sort of a plane that they are now?
I can't, there was always some of that differentiation. I have to tell you, and you probably know this from past discussion, or maybe you don't remember, but I'm not much of an athletic fan. That's just not been one of my great interests. So I wasn't as much interested in the athletic aspects, although I went to some football games and basketball games, but it was a much different environment then. Yeah, but it was smaller. So, yes, you were around.
When you were vice chancellor, in the next segment I want to talk more about that and some of the changes that came during the time that you were at the university. But I'm curious as to the major problems that were your challenges in certain jobs that you had, and then when you look back as a student, or maybe when you first began that job, how different it was. Because I ask about cars, parking is a key problem now. I don't know whether you had any kind of meetings or any kind of connection with what was going on with that, but I'm just curious as to the problems that existed up into the 1990s and maybe the early 2000s before you retired, and how they compared, and how you looked back and said, oh, if they only knew how easy it was back then to compare to the headaches that we had at this point in time.
Parking is a universal problem, I would say, experienced by every college campus, probably all communities, businesses, colleges, hospitals, every entity that has employees and has that's not in a major city that has public transportation. And we have public transportation, but it's not such that we have a great commuter base here, which it'd be nice if we did, but we don't, or we haven't had. I would have to tell you, David, I think the parking was about the same when I was a student as it was 50 years later, and it probably is today. There's never quite enough, or to rephrase that and say it like the head of parking there, Jim Joy, would today, there is never enough parking where people want to park. There's probably enough parking, but it's not where everybody wants to park. So they always feel there's a shortage. We used to say when I was a vice chancellor, when we do student surveys, and they would come back and parking would be the number one complaint. And I would say, well, things are going pretty good. If that's all because parking is always a problem, So I said, if they're talking about parking and that's the major problem, then we're doing pretty good. When they talk about the residence hall problems or food service problem, then you've got things you need to address. But parking is something that's universal. So I don't think that parking is any worse now than it was then. It's probably considered just as bad by those that consider it. Although I have to tell you, I think it's much better today. Yeah. Overall, well, on the campus has done a better job addressing it than the city has been able to, giving the current influx of housing. That's going to have to be addressed some way, and I don't know exactly how the city and the developers are going to do that, but they've got something they're going to have to address, because while they're going to get some students, in my opinion, that will come here and be
car-free, little used car.
This is just, we haven't made that transition, and public transportation is not yet able to satisfy those needs. So there's going to be a period when we're going to have some problems.
We're going to take a break, and we'll come back and have another segment and visit with Key Groshong some more. You're listening to The Heritage Show on News Talk 1400 KFRU.
This is the KFRU Heritage Series. More coming up on News Talk 1400 KFRU. This is the KFRU Heritage Series.
Our guest on the Heritage Show is Key Groshong. He's had many roles in this community, donates a lot of his time, a lot of his energy, but also as a University of Missouri Vice Chancellor at the end of his time there in 2002, began in 1965. He told us in the first segment. Well, I want to explore that a little bit more. Now, many people maybe who were following the story about the tombstone of Thomas Jefferson, that'll give us an opportunity to swing into some of your responsibilities, because you were the go-to guy about that tombstone in the news, it seems like, recently. I'm curious, because when I read that, I'm curious as to how well you know Jesse Hall. I'm not talking about the politics of Jesse Hall. I'm talking about the
physically.
Real Jesse Hall. Have you been way up into the top of Jesse Hall?
If there's a spot in Jesse Hall that I haven't been in, it's because I didn't know about it. So, yes, when I retired, I had pretty well been all over Jesse. We had building coordinators for the university of various buildings when I was there, and I assume they still do. And I was the building coordinator. At least I was either the building coordinator in name, and somebody else did the work when I was vice chancellor, or I actually was the building coordinator.
What's a building coordinator?
Well, it was a person responsible for the building. If there was a problem or you needed to contact someone to contact the tenants, someone to sort of be the go-to person for that building if there was a problem with work to be done, and you would go to them. So it was a person sort of responsible for that building, and we had one for each building. And Jesse, of course, was the one that I had. And so I had pretty much access over the years. The other thing I had when I was a vice chancellor was I had a master key that would let me into pretty much every room in that building, because there again, somebody has to have the ability to do that if there's a major problem.
I love that building. That building is terrific. Now, how far up can you go in the dome?
You can go all the way to the top of the dome.
Have you done that? I mean, have you gone up there and just looked around?
Well, yes, yes and no. Let me put to you this way, David. I have been to the top of the dome on the outside and touched the ball. In 1990s, if you remember, we did a total restoration of the exterior. There was scaffolding all around it. And the building was completely in scaffolding, and I one day walked to the top of the dome and touched the ball on top, which is about this big around, by the way.
He just did about a basketball.
Yeah, about basketball or a little bit bigger. It doesn't look that big from the ground. I did that. Now, on the inside, you can go up to the fourth floor, and then you can go up a ladder and go through a trapdoor and go into the attic, which is above that, which is the part where the dome is. And then you can go up a level into it with stairs, and then there is a ladder that goes straight up the center of that to the very top, that little cupola thing on the top. I have been to that point, but I never climbed that whole ladder all the way to the top. I thought I didn't want to go that bad to climb that. That was quite a job. The dome, interestingly enough, for people that are interested in the historical aspects, Jesse Hall, the distance from the ground to the top of the fourth floor of Jesse Hall on the outside, and I can't tell you the exact footage, but whatever type that is, then from there to the top of the dome is the same distance. So the dome is as high as the building sitting on top of it, yes.
Well, I'll have to look at that a different way
now,
because I never.
As I remember, that's the distance. Now, the next thing about the dome that most people find interesting is the dome is built on top of the building. The building is a very solid structure built out of masonry up to the top, and then the roof is wood trusses. Okay, wood rafters, not trusses, because they're built before they really used a truss. The dome is built out of wood. Okay, it sits up there, and it is framed with wood and covered with sheet metal, basically tin, stamped tin pieces. So Jesse's dome was ordered out of a catalog, as I'm told. They picked out different sections and they stacked them up.
No.
And they put it together and then put the roof on. So if you go up there and look at it, if you ever get the opportunity, and if you're interested, I might know somebody that might be able to help you.
I'd love to go out there.
I might. And other folk listening, do not call me, because I'm not extending that offer. But the dome is made out of pressed tin pieces that were affixed to this wooden frame. So if you go up there and look at it, you'll think, my, that's not nearly as impressive from the inside as it is from the outside.
Because the distance now, and you know what I've noticed over the last few weeks, it's just glowing as white as it's ever been. I don't know what's going on, but I mean, I'm talking about up to the roof part of that, but it's just standing out. It's spectacular.
And the dome is, of course, lit at night, and that's an interesting phenomenon. But that's how the dome is built out of
thin tin? I mean, so it could be a hail hits it, it's going to leave dents.
It was pressed like, I don't know, but one of the places, I guess the last place, maybe there's others in the country, but one of the big places that made that stuff was Nevada, Missouri. They made these pressed tin for ceilings, and you remember old buildings used to be.
In the inside of them.
You've seen how well they made all that down there, and they may have made this. I don't remember where it came from, but it's a sheet metal that they put it in a big press, and it pressed out that design on the outside, and then they painted it. Well, then you go on the inside, and it's pressed out. You can see where they put the piece of tin and pressed it out on the inside. So the dome is just a wood frame with a metal covering, sheet metal covering.
So how was there, like, is there any? Everybody's got an attic, or people who do have attics, they have stuff stored up there. Is that a storage area, or is that just
that's
kind of
where
empty?
the Jefferson tombstone was stored?
I knew
not
you
in
were
the dome. The dome piece, that's not. There's nothing.
Was there
in there
ever anything used up there?
That manure. Oh, the dome was used for antennas. They were over the years, and I don't know what's left there because communication methods have changed a lot. But at one time, I believe, if I remember correctly, there was an antenna that beamed the signal for KBI radio out to its antenna wherever. Was it a KFRU? I don't remember which one it was on. But so there were antennas in there at one time. I don't know whether any of those are still up there because that, of course, technology has changed.
We'll talk about the attic where the tombstone was found in a moment, but you mentioned bat manure up there. So what's the bat population like?
Well, that changes depending on how tight the dome is they can keep it. Over the years, we've had trouble, of course, with windows. There are windows, as you can see from downstairs looking. And over the years, they would have trouble with those breaking, and that's just because of the weather and all, but not necessarily vandals. And you would get bats in there. Bats can get in a pretty small place, and so there have been bats, and they try to keep that out because that's not a very obviously sanitary thing to have. When they redid the dome in the 90s, they really reinforced that, used a much stronger glass with wire in it, and it's probably much tighter than it has been for years. So we try to keep that cleaned up. But there have been bats in there, yes, over the years.
Did you ever get calls from people saying, some students are trying to sneak up into the dome, or you ever find
the police
students?
do, yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The police have over the years. That's used to be maybe more than it is now. They really have much better electronic, probably, methodology
that spoils all the fun,
watching that. Well, it does some of that. Yes, some of that.
So the attic, then, the tombstone was up there. The Jefferson tombstone. I don't know if we need to tell the story again, but we might just a little bit for people who haven't been following that. terrific honor for the University of Missouri to be given that tombstone. It was the original tombstone that was made for Thomas Jefferson's grave, but it was made out of material that wasn't going to weather well.
Well, when Jefferson died, before Jefferson died, he specified exactly what he wished his tombstone to look like, the size, and generally what kind of a material. He said a coarse material, didn't have to be fine. He specified the size, the shape, the bliss shape. He specified the obituary that he wanted placed on it. And so when he died, after several years, because as you probably know from the story, Jefferson died basically broke, and it took the relatives a while to get organized and get his tombstone. So I think it was about 5 years after he died that they did build the exact stone that he wanted put on his grave. It was done out of granite. The obelisk was made out of granite. When they got ready to carve the wording, as I'm told, granite is a much coarser stone. They couldn't carve these little letters, which on his epitaph are about, I'd say, an inch, maybe an inch high, inch and a half. They couldn't carve that in that granite. It was too coarse. So they got a piece of marble, which is a much finer but a much softer stone. They got a piece of marble that's shaped like the shape, and they carved his epitaph in that and attached it to the granite stone. Now, what they did carve in the granite, and what most people today don't really realize, is that in the lower section, his stone was made in basically three pieces. The base is a square piece. Then there's the obelisk that's tapered, and then there was the granite, basically tablet that set, or the marble tablet that set on it. All right. In the lower square base piece, they carved his date of birth and death, and they were in bigger letters, about 4 or 5 inches high. So that has got carving in it. So if you go over there and look at that stone today, if you look at the back, the east side of the stone, facing the chancellor's residence, you'll see the notch where the granite, the marble piece was originally affixed, and down in the bottom, you can see where the carving of his...
And it actually is facing, it depends on
the
whether you say
backside is facing the west or facing the
quadrangle.
That's correct.
And the reason they put it that way?
Well, I think the reason they did that, the stone was relocated. The stone originally set, the obelisk, originally set up near the back of Jesse Hall, up in one of those, there. If you look at Jesse if you're standing in the north looking south, there are two notches or two alcove areas outside. It originally set back in one of those. And a lot of people probably didn't know it was there because it wasn't really out where it's prominent like it is today. 1975 or 6, the sesquicentennial year, they moved it. They moved that stone over where it is now and made that nice little area. And I think that's when they turned it, or it may have been a turn before that. I wouldn't guarantee that. But I think the reason they did, David, because they affixed a bronze plaque onto the stone that tells basically gives the epitaph.
Yeah. There any other goodies up in the attic?
Well, I don't know that there's any other treasures like that I'm aware of. The attic has an interesting history in itself because in the early years of Jesse Hall, the attic was actually used. One of the things it was used for, there was a rifle range up there for the ROTC students.
In the attic of Jesse Hall?
That's what I'm told. There is an area that they used, and they had a little, I guess, for like a .22 rifle or something, but that was the rifle range, and they met up there and would target practice in the attic of Jesse.
How can you do that? I mean, it's not insulated well enough that wouldn't disturb everybody else in Jesse, would it?
Well,
that's funny.
Well, as I said, Jesse's an interesting building, the way it's built. Jesse is a building built prior to the use of concrete for the foundation. So Jesse's built on a stone foundation, big, wide stones, and it basically they taper up. So if you look at Jesse, and the basement walls are thick, then the first floor walls, if you notice Jesse first floor walls are very thick, and then as you go up, the walls get thinner. So it's a masonry building up to the top of the fourth floor. That area's masonry, but above that, then it's a wood frame building up there. So. Really, I don't know that sound transmitted too badly down in the building.
It would have gone up.
It gone up, and it is not frankly, it's not insulated. So the way it was originally built, it was just built and the roof was put on. So, it's hot and cold up there.
Is there any evidence of the rifle range up
there's
there?
There's the place, there's an area where they can tell you where it was. But no, that's all gone. But that's the story that was what was there. See, Jesse Hall, when it was built to replace Academic Hall, was used for many, many functions, not primarily as an administrative building. It was much of the classroom space.
Really?
And, well, for example, I don't know, many people my age would know, but the museum, the Museum of Art and Archaeology, all of those plaster casts in that gallery were on the third floor of Jesse Hall in the West End. That was a big open room, and those were there until they remodeled Pickard Hall to put the museum in. I remember they had to take the windows out of the third floor, take the windows and the frames out, and lower those plaster casts out.
Oh,
That's how they got them out of the building, as I recall. Some of the big ones.
What was Jesse Hall, which we think of now as I'm talking about the where the concerts are and where the performances are. Now that's neat. Was that added much later to Jesse Hall, or has that always been a part of the East Side?
The answer to that is yes and yes, or yes and no. The building was built with an auditorium. All right, in the area where Jesse Auditorium sits today, there was an auditorium. It was actually the stage was turned a different way, and the auditorium was sort of, as I recall, horseshoe shaped. I don't remember that. That was gone. It was changed in the 50s. Mid-50s, they tore that off, or they tore that out. They actually left the walls of the building, the north wall and the south wall, and, of course, it abutted the building to the west. And then to the east, they tore that out, took that wall out, and they rebuilt Jesse Auditorium as it is today. But that was done in the 50s. But there was an auditorium, and in fact, if you go into Jesse sometime, as you're going down to the auditorium, somewhere along the foyer or in Jesse, or in the auditorium foyer, there are some photographs of what that original auditorium looked like. Apparently, it got to be, of course, small for one thing, and then it was a little rickety the way it was built, so they rebuilt it. So that auditorium is newer than the rest of the building, but it was built in the 50s.
Keith Groshong is our guest. We're going to pause and come back with a final segment. We hope you stay with us. This is the Heritage Show on KFRU.
This is the KFRU Heritage Series. More coming up on News Talk 1400. KFRU. This is the KFRU Heritage Series.
Heritage Show on KFRU, and we've spent time talking with Keith Groshong on this program, and we're going to continue. There's going to be much more than I probably can squeeze in with this, but I'm curious. We talked a lot about Jesse Hall. Were there other buildings on campus that you got to know really well that you said, I like this building. This building is fun, or were you so busy with other things that you didn't have a chance?
I would have to tell you I was very partial to Jesse, and I still am.
Yeah.
And the reason, David, I spent my whole career in Jesse. I started there, and actually I was hired in that building, and I started in the basement on the west end. That was the accounting department when I started. As a quick little aside, when I interviewed, I guess in March maybe, and then I gave 30 days notice, and I came late April. When I interviewed, the accounting department was in the basement, the west end, lower level, and but when I came to work actually in April, they were remodeling that accounting department in the lower level, and at that time there was a World War II era Quonset hut that sat immediately west of Jesse, right up against the building. I bet there wasn't 2 feet between the building and the Quonset. And in fact, I think that sidewalk that's there was there, and the building set in between. Doesn't look like it's possible.
Wow.
But I have a photograph of that. I actually started and spent the first 3 months of my career at the University of Missouri in a Quonset hut. Okay? It was so good that when it rained, you could not talk on the phone because you could not hear in that building. But we were there so I started my career in Jesse Hall, basically. I went to the third floor, and then I finished on the first floor. And I spent 37 years in that building. So I am very fond of that building. There's many of the buildings on the quadrangle I just find very fascinating. But the White Campus has some beautiful stone buildings, too.
Yeah.
The Memorial Tower, the Memorial Student Union Tower is a lovely building.
How many chancellors did you work for and with?
Well, I like to say I worked for all of them. The first chancellor was John Swada, and he came a little before I did. You see, the system formed in the 1964. It's when Elmer Ellis was president. He formed the University of Missouri system. Prior to that time, it had been University of Missouri. We had a campus here, and then Rolla School of Mines and Metallurgy in Rolla. Those two, and the rest of it didn't exist. Well, when they formed the system, then, of course, he was the president, remained the president. Then they had to go to chancellors. And they hired a man by the name of John Swada, who'd been here. I think he was a dean of business school one time. Then he'd done some function in Jeff City. I don't remember which department he headed, but he was over there. And he came back, and he was the first chancellor. So I came, and he was chancellor at the time I came, and I then worked for all the chancellors through. I retired. Richard was chancellor, but Brady was the provost. So Brady and I worked together. I did not work exactly.
So I understand what your comment means, that you worked for all of them. You worked for everyone that has come through there. So
at this point.
To this point. So who take us through then? Can you remember the order, the line of succession and chancellor?
Well, I'll try. John Swada was first, and when he left, they hired Herbert Schooling, who was a professor, I believe, of education, the dean of the College of Education. I believe that's what Herb did. He was there till he retired. They hired Barbara Euling. Euling came here. I believe she was out of Oklahoma at that time. Was the first female chancellor, one of the first in a major public university in the country, as I recall. Then when she left, they hired Haskell Monroe, and Haskell came from Texas. Then when he left, they hired Chuck Kiesler, Charles Kiesler. He was at Vanderbilt. And then when Kiesler left, Richard Wallace became chancellor. And then when Richard retired, Brady.
Isn't it interesting? I mean, they all have their own personalities and their own ways of doing that job. I suppose
every chancellor is different. And one of the things that I always found fascinating, in my case, is that I used to say I lasted 3 chancellors. I started with Haskell and retired when Richard was chancellor, Richard Wallace. And, it's amazing because the life expectancy of a chancellor is 5 to 7 years, maybe even a little less than that now. And obviously the life expectancy of a vice chancellor is about the same. And so I was able to last about 15 years, and I always thought that was a interesting phenomenon. I can't tell you exactly why I was able to make it, but I was able to get along pretty well with everybody.
Because you had the keys to all of their offices.
I guess I did.
Now, I'm curious.
And I enjoyed them all. They were all wonderful people to work with. Every chancellor's been different, but they've all been interesting and fun to be with.
I'd like for you to share your thoughts, because you told me off the air that you used to live on Tilley, which is a part of the area along Stewart.
Yes.
And these great homes along there. And that used to be a place, we hear it over and over again, that a lot of the professors, a lot of the workers at the University of Missouri and administrators lived there. That had to be a great experience. It was almost kind of like it wasn't a parade, but I'm just saying that there would have been a lot of people that we could see walking to the campus.
The comment that I made to David when we were on the break was that I had lived on Tilley for 27 years. I came in about 5 years after I came to the university. We lived in another house right outside town, and I had a chance to come back and buy this house on Tilley, which we did. It was about a 15-minute walk every day, and for most of the time we lived there, I walked every day. Now, be breaks, but mostly. And it was such an interesting experience because there were at that time, and I'm sure there still are, a number of university employees, faculty members, administrators, and other people that worked there that would walk. And so I would walk with these people, and it just was a very enjoyable experience. I'm sure it still is. That area, the area west of Jesse on Stewart Road was, for many years, and probably still is, heavily concentrated with university folk. Many professors lived there. When I moved to Tilley, the dean of what had been the law school had lived there. I think he was dead, I know already. The dean of business school was there, I think he may have still been alive when we moved there, but he was retired. There were many folk in that area like that. Dean English, who was the dean of arts and science, lived around the corner on Lathrop there, and Elmer Keel, who was the dean of agriculture, lived down on Lathrop, and so there were many folk from the university that
probably not a lot of students doing what they do now, though, and that's park on those streets in that
no,
neighborhood.
There wasn't.
Usually that's on Garth,
much,
though, not quite as far west as Tilly.
Wasn't quite as much of that then, but it was a very enjoyable place to live and be able to walk to work. I was telling David earlier, I said, it cleared your mind. In the morning, it got you sort of started thinking about your day and what you're going to do. And as you walked home, if you had any frustrations during the day, you got it out of your system by the time you got home, so you didn't take it out on the wife or the dog.
Yeah, you had a little hill there that you could have.
Yes.
In both directions, you're going to have an uphill and a downhill as you walk through that. I mean, your thoughts. We've got a minute left. Your thoughts about just a career at the University of Missouri. I mean, you're such a positive person. Every time I have any kind of connection with you, you always seem to be positive and happy and really energized by a lot going on around you.
Well, it doesn't do you much good to do any other way. I found that early on in life, that if I started out positive, it would probably make the day go better. My experience working at the university, I tell you, I can't think of a more rewarding career than one I had at the university. It is a wonderful place to work. You're always associated with the smartest people in the country. You're in some of the brightest minds and the newest technology and the newest techniques and things that are coming forward. You always have, I used to say, my customer is always 18 years old in September 15th or September 1, whenever school would start. They would come in and they always brought the latest and the greatest. They were enthusiastic. They were excited to be there. And it was just a dynamic place to work. And it wasn't, and I hope it still isn't that way. It was not quite so cutthroat sometime as a business environment can be. It was, I can't say that it was any less hectic at times, because it was, but it was an enjoyable place to work. And, of course, Columbia, and you've been here a good while, know that, this is probably, and we tout this, but it's probably one of the best places in the nation to live. I'm surprised Columbia isn't 5 million people. If people knew what you and I know about it, they'd all be here, and then it wouldn't be so nice.
Let's not tell them to go.
No, but it is a wonderful place to be. The university is a wonderful place to work. And I think any university campus or in college environment would be that, but this one's particularly nice. I've just was here and been here all my life and enjoyed it. I enjoyed it immensely. I can't think of anything I'd have enjoyed more.
Well, I've enjoyed talking to you today, and I appreciate you taking the time to visit with us on our program.
Been fun. Enjoy visiting with you.
Key Groshong has been our guest. This is the Heritage Show on News Talk 1400 KFRU.